Grandpa's workshop had always been the one place everyone promised I could enter someday. The morning after his funeral, my older brother Daniel stood in front of its locked door and quietly said, "Not you." I laughed at first because it sounded ridiculous. Then I noticed he already had Grandpa's brass key in his hand. Why had Grandpa given it to him? Our parents exchanged nervous glances but said nothing. That silence unsettled me more than Daniel's refusal. Growing up, Grandpa repaired broken clocks, carved tiny wooden birds, and somehow fixed anything anyone brought him. He always told me, "One day you'll understand why every tool has a story." I assumed the workshop held expensive antiques or documents. Maybe Daniel was protecting our inheritance. It seemed selfish, but grief changes people. At least that's what I told myself. Later that afternoon, I walked around the old barn where the workshop stood. The windows were dusty, yet one corner had been cleaned from the inside. Someone had looked out recently. I pressed my face against the glass. The familiar workbench remained exactly as I remembered, except one drawer stood slightly open. Inside rested dozens of identical wooden birds. Everyone had a small number carved underneath. Why would Grandpa number decorative carvings? Before I could look longer, Daniel appeared behind me. His face wasn't angry. It looked frightened. I said, "Stay away," he whispered. "For how long?" He hesitated. "I don't know." That answer made no sense. If this was about money, why did he sound terrified instead of greedy? That evening, I searched Grandpa's study for anything connected to the workshop. Inside his favorite history book, I discovered an old grocery receipt. Nothing unusual, until I noticed handwritten coordinates on the back. Beside them were 3 words. Bird 27. I stared toward the dark barn outside. Suddenly, the workshop felt far less ordinary. And I realized Daniel wasn't guarding an inheritance. He was guarding a mystery he desperately hoped I would never uncover. The next morning, I drove to the coordinates before telling anyone. They led me to an abandoned picnic area beside an old river. Nothing looked remarkable. Then I noticed a weathered bench with the number 27 burned into its underside. Someone had carved the same tiny bird symbol beside it. Inside a loose plank rested a small metal key. Not cash, not jewelry, just a key. My first thought was obvious. Grandpa had created some elaborate treasure hunt for the grandchildren. Daniel must have wanted to solve it first. The idea fit every clue, until I returned home. Daniel was sitting alone on the porch. His eyes were red from crying. "I found something," I admitted. His shoulders dropped. "So he really expected you to continue?" "Continue what?" He refused to answer. Instead, he handed me an old photograph. Grandpa stood beside 3 strangers outside the workshop, nearly 30 years earlier. On the back, Grandpa had written only one sentence. "Every promise costs someone." I recognized one face, Mrs. Harper. She had lived across town for decades. Everyone believed she barely knew our family. When I visited her that afternoon, she immediately recognized the photograph. Instead of explaining, she unlocked a cabinet and removed another numbered wooden bird. "Number 52, she whispered. "I hoped your grandfather would outlive this responsibility." "What responsibility?" She shook her head. "He never built birds." "What?" "He built hiding places." Before I could ask another question, Daniel arrived. He wasn't angry. He looked defeated. Then Mrs. Harper quietly said something that shattered my assumption. "Your brother wasn't protecting the workshop. He was protecting you from what was hidden inside." Daniel slowly placed the workshop key into my hand. "You deserve the truth." But his trembling hands warned me I probably didn't. The workshop smelled exactly as I remembered. Sawdust, machine oil, coffee, nothing extraordinary, until I opened Bird 27. Its hollow center contained a folded hospital bracelet. A newborn's. Not mine, not Daniel's. Dozens of birds lined the shelves. Each held something different. A tiny shoe, a wedding ring, military dog tags, a faded photograph. Every object belonged to someone in town. None belonged to Grandpa. Confused, I found an old ledger beneath the workbench. It wasn't a diary. It was a record. Years ago, a fire destroyed the county records office. Families lost birth certificates, marriage licenses, military documents, photographs, and keepsakes forever. Grandpa had quietly spent years collecting surviving personal items before they disappeared forever. When officials couldn't preserve them, he secretly did. Each numbered bird matched a family. Each hiding place protected an irreplaceable memory until the owners could safely reclaim it. Mrs. Harper's bird held her late husband's final handwritten note. The hospital bracelet belonged to a woman whose premature baby had survived against impossible odds. Grandpa never wanted recognition. He only wanted memories returned when people were emotionally ready. Then I reached the final page. One name remained unchecked. Mine. Inside Bird 91 waited a small cassette tape. Daniel quietly sat beside me. I never listened, he said. He told me it wasn't for me. My hands shook as I pressed play. Grandpa's voice filled the silent workshop. I hope you're ready. I wasn't. I called my daughter that evening. There was a long silence after I mentioned the closet. I hoped you'd never need to open it, she finally said. I didn't want your first memory of that year to be fear. She explained she had watched me rebuild myself piece by piece. If she told me everything outright, I'd spend years grieving what I'd forgotten. Instead, she wanted me to see what remained. Love. Patience. Ordinary moments that survived memory itself. The maple tree outside had become enormous. Every birthday, she mailed fertilizer without mentioning why. Every visit, she looked at that tree before coming inside. Now I understood. It wasn't planted to celebrate recovery. It was planted because neither of us knew how much would grow after something nearly died. The next spring, I flew to visit her. We planted another maple in her backyard. No speeches. No dramatic apologies. Just 2 shovels, tired hands, and fresh soil. Some memories never return. Others arrive differently. Sometimes they live inside receipts, photographs, worn coffee mugs, and quiet acts nobody applauds. I used to believe love was remembered through grand moments. Now I know it survives through the small ones we almost overlook. Every autumn, we send each other pictures of both trees. They never grow in exactly the same direction. They don't have to, neither did we.